Hey everyone. Now that Cortex 1.6 is so close to being released, I wanted to do kind of a full end-to-end demo, um, kind of showing where we're at. Uh, if you're not familiar, Cortex is a basically a read-only version of Cherwell. It's a way to see all of your Cherwell data even after you've stopped using Cherwell, even after the end of life date. It doesn't have any dependencies on Cherwell itself. The only thing you need is a copy of your Cherwell database, which if you're still working with Avanti, if you're hosted, you can get a copy of your database from Avanti. You can submit a support ticket. Um, you can ask in the comments, or there's contact information down below to ask me how to do that. Um, and we can certainly help you through that process. But in this video, I want to give a demo of once you have your database, once you've restored it onto a local SQL server that you control. It can be in a physical machine or your own cloud. If you want to use AWS or Azure, that's totally fine. I want to show you how you can use Cortex to actually get access to that data. So let me switch over to the demo site, which is it's live on the internet. You can use this demo site. You can play around with it. Um, I'll leave there is a link in the video description, and I should note that the data that it shows is a demo. It's a Cherwell demo database. I think it comes from 2023.1. Um, but that's only because that's the database that I restored. Uh, when you use Cortex on your database, it will show all of your data, all of your custom business objects. It is 100% tailored to your system, um, because basically nothing is hard coded. It's all generating everything you see from the configuration that comes from the database. So there are two main things that I want to highlight, and one is kind of ad hoc searching, and the other one is just browsing business object records. We'll start with searching, and I'll do it from the perspective of incident, though this drop down allows you to search any major business object. So I can do something simple like searching for incidents that have to do with printer. And apparently I've been talking for too long, so it's forced me to log out. Let's try that again. So let's search for incidents that have to do with printer. And we get a bunch of incidents that have to do with printers. Printer won't print anything, having trouble printing, so on and so forth. We can also search with filters. So let's say we want to see all incidents that are, hmm, let's go with all closed incidents, right? So because status is a validated field, we actually can just select from a dropdown. So we can select all incidents, status is equal to close. Let's search, and there we get all closed incidents. And this is actually 42 items, which is more than one page. It looks like that's off the end of the screen, but there are actually multiple pages of these results. Now, I could go through the individual pages here, but what if I wanted to export a CSV? This button right up here does just that. And this export CSV button shows or exports all of the records that would show in the grid, not just the ones on the first page. So if you had 10 pages of results, you would get all 10 pages worth of records in the CSV. It would all be end to end, not split up by pages. Um, Another thing to note is that the columns that are shown here in this grid come directly from the grid configuration in Cherwell. So if you specifically had, five very specific columns set up in your grid, those are the five columns that you would see here on this grid. Let's look at a particular incident. Let's look at this one. This should look very familiar to most of you. If you've seen the standard out of the box content, that's come from Cherwell versions, I want to say the late nines, maybe the early tens. Um, this is what the out of the box content looks like. Uh, and the reason it looks like that in Cortex is because that's the way it looks in Cherwell. That's the way it was designed and configured. So we have the summary business object form across the top. We have tabs for the form arrangement. We have the overview form here. We have specifics. All of the data for these fields is populated. All of the data for these, I think they're labels technically, is populated, even though most of them come from expressions. So expressions are supported as well. The activity pane shows all of the activity stuff. We have a video specifically about that. It's a few videos back on the channel. Uh, Journals obviously shows a lot of the same stuff as the activity pane, but all of these records are the associated journals. You can double click on any one of these rows and it shows you that BizOb form. So for any relationship, you can basically drill down and keep drilling down into the next record and follow the rabbit trails wherever they may go. Same thing for any of these other tabs, right? If it's supposed to show a form, it shows a form. If it's supposed to show a grid, it shows a grid. You can also see all of this all at once by going into print view, which is helpful if you're printing. It's also helpful if you want to export to PDF. Um, Basically, what that does is every tab, instead of being only one visible at a time, they show up end to end with titles. So overview, activity, journals, and so on and so forth. Now, switching back into whatever the opposite of print view is, screen view, I suppose, we can go back to browse and we see major business objects, supporting objects, and lookup tables. Basically, any business object in your Cherwell system uh, is supported by Cortex. Major business objects show um, groups the way you would expect to see them in Cherwell. So, for instance, configuration item shows all of the configuration item group members, and the BizOp form is appropriate for the particular group member because the form is associated with the member, the grid is associated with the leader, right? Um, and Cortex does support. This is a question that's come up in a few cases. Cortex does support uh, grids that have fields that are only present on the member. And what happens is obviously they only show a value for the members that have that field. Back to these lists, as long as you have a grid and a business object form, you can view the data for the business object. That should be every business object in Cherwell, because when you create a new business object in Cherwell, it automatically creates a basic grid and a basic form for you. As long as you kept those, you're in good shape. If for whatever reason you deleted those, you won't be able to see the data because there isn't a grid to show or a form to show, right? With that in mind, a couple other things that are less, they're smaller features, but they might be worthwhile. I'll just kind of go through them rapid fire. The next one is saved searches. So one note with this is that all of the data that Cortex is using is read-only. You can actually configure it so that the SQL user account that Cortex uses has read-only access to the data. If that's the case, well, even if that's not the case, Cortex makes no changes to the data, period. No changes to the Cherwell data. What that means is that your data is not changing. Your saved searches aren't changing because they're part of the data. They're in the database, which means that these searches will always show the same results. So it doesn't matter if I run all closed incidents now or 3 years from now, it's always going to show these same closed incidents. However, that might be exactly what you need. I know some people have talked about reports. Uh, my recommendation for those, because they're a little bit of squirrely bits. Supports Reports aren't supported by Cortex right now, My recommendation for that is if you can create a saved search based on the report, do that because you can run that saved search in Cortex after you switch over. You can also see your one steps. Now, it's see your one steps, not run your one steps. This is primarily from the perspective of kind of what did that one step do again, or what did we do when we were using Cherwell? What was the process this change went through? What was the process this incident went through? That sort of thing. So you can see all the details of what the one step actually does, but of course you can't actually run it because that would most likely change the data, right? Next up, we do have a couple features that uh, can modify the database. They don't modify the Cherwell data. Nothing will ever modify your Cherwell data. Um, but Cortex can have its own separate part of the database for kind of its own configuration. Two things: user management and external connections. I'm going to start with external connections because it's pretty quick. If you were using a loopback connection to basically see some of the data in, especially some of the trebuchet tables, you can edit that connection and check this checkbox, and basically it marks it in the system as this is a loopback connection. Again, this is a separate part of the database than where all your Cherwell data lives. It basically marks it as a loopback connection, and that enables Cortex uh, to run queries against that data so that your BizOp forms actually show the complete data that you're expecting. If you're using an external connection that isn't a loopback connection, you can also configure those as well and give new configuration. For instance, if you want to talk to an archived version of the data as opposed to the production version of the data, um, or if because Cortex is running in a different spot necessarily than your old Cherwell installation, things like the data source might be different, right? The domain name, the host name might be different, the username and password might be different, that sort of thing. So you can configure that here. Now, when it comes to user management, the way Cortex works is it doesn't have any internal authentication system. So Cherwell had the internal Cherwell user accounts. Cortex doesn't use any of that for reasons that we can get into in a separate video or maybe in the comments down below. Uh, and it also doesn't have its own version of that. The expectation is that you will use your single sign-on provider to perform authentication. We have documentation on how to do this for pretty much any SSO provider that you could want. We have specifically supported ones, but any of the ones that we don't officially support, one or more of those documents that we do have probably applies to the system that you're using. And if you have questions, you can, of course, ask us about those. Basically, what happens is your SSO provider authenticates the users and then sends over, in the case of SAML, it's a series of claims to Cortex, and we can validate that those claims came from your SSO provider and that whoever is logged in fact that user. We match that user with the information that's in the Cherwell database, the same way that Cherwell would. And from that, we can get the username and email address, and more importantly, the security group. The security group is important because this governs what business objects and what records within those tables the particular user can see. So with this logic, we can ensure that, say, an HR person can see HR stuff, IT person can see IT stuff, and the IT people can't see HR stuff, right? Now, what happens if someone joins your company who never had access to Cherwell, but needs to have access to the historical Cherwell data? Well, that's where this user management screen comes in. You can add a user, and these, well, you don't need to. modify this last modified date, that gets modified automatically. So you really only have three things to fill in the blanks for. Username typically should just follow the pattern of other usernames. Um, that's about as specific as I could get in this video. We could certainly talk about that for your particular scenario based on how you're authenticating when we set everything up for you. Email address is self-explanatory. It's their email address. Security group. This is the Cherwell security group. This list, let me click on this one and show you what it looks like. If you edit, you can see and select any security group that already exists in Cherwell. So there's no way to create new security groups, but any security group in Cherwell already can be selected for that user, which is probably what you want. You're adding someone to the HR team, you add them to the HR security group, right? Similarly, if someone switches teams, goes from HR to IT, and they shouldn't be able to see HR anymore, you can edit that record and just change what security group they're mapped to. Again, all of this is stored in a separate table that is unrelated or it's isolated from all the Cherwell data. So it's kind of this logical layer on top of all the Cherwell data, kind of an override, if you will. And you can also basically disable access by assigning people to the anonymous browser security group, basically saying that you have access to nothing. Um, and with that, that's pretty much everything that's in Cortex 1.6 right now. Um, we continue to add features. We continue to uh, work around edge cases. Every database that we encounter, people have done something new, and that's honestly that's the most exciting part of the job is seeing what new and different configuration is in the next database that we're using. Um, so we'd love to see Cortex running on your database. There's links down below to get in contact with us and schedule the demo and schedule all of the rest of that process. Um, and again, you're more than welcome to check out this demo. There's also links down below to download a copy of Cortex. You can try it out on your own data if you want to do that by yourself without our help. But if you need our help, we're here. Again, ways to contact us down below. I should also mention that every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, we host the Cortex Users Group. Uh, it's an hour that we have set aside where you can come talk to us, ask us questions about your Cortex experiences, talk to other people who are using Cortex about their experiences, ask them questions. Um, as we start to add more features, which the vast majority of them are driven by you all. You can ask how people are implementing these features and how they're finding them, how they're working them into their workflow. Realistically, the same way that the Cherwell users groups were structured. That's really what I'm going for here. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's the demo. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Contact us. Schedule some time with me. There's a link to book time on my calendar down below. And thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. You can see past videos where we go more in depth into some of these features. You'll also see new videos as we add new features. I try to demo at least everything. eh, I try to demo everything at least once. Thanks for watching.